Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to our second installment of our extended play series, which is a series of live stream between me, Marco De Mutis, digital creator of the Museum of Winterthur, and Matteo Bittanti. Hi, Matteo.
Ciao.
Co-creator of the show, media scholar, game artist, machinima connoisseur, the brain behind Viral, many other projects. We are doing this series of live streams as an informal late night chat among the two of us. Very tired late night chat, at least for me. We will talk about the individual chapters of the show. So How to Win at Photography is this exhibition which is currently ongoing at Fotomuseum Winterthur until the 10th of October, which revolves around ideas of photography and play, image making, and games. And you can look for more information on How to Win at .photography, which hosts an online publication of the show. So today we're talking about one of the 5 chapters. We're talking about role play, which is a chapter that deals with the play as a strategy to use images to talk about identity, the construction of identity, critiquing the norms in which identity is shaped through representation, the rules of this sort of games, but also the way in which play can be an empowering act to critique those traditions, to bring out voices who are silenced and identities that do not have the same chance to be represented. Yeah, where do you want to start? So the idea is that we're using this stream again as a little bit of a informal chat, but also to talk about the exchange that we had and how we came to then the selection of the exhibition, because the idea is always that the exhibition is such a finished product, and then there's all of these ideas, all of these other artworks as well that do not make it to the final selection for one reason or the other. And I think it's always interesting to kind of find a different way to talk about these ideas and these other works and present them somehow. So Matteo, where do you think is where can we start in terms of like talking about role play?
Well, I have no idea. But perhaps like a good start would be that we're basically performing a conversation right now. So that brings us back to the idea of the presentation of self in everyday life, right? The idea there's a backstage and there's a front stage where we're performing, but then the internet kind of like destroys that dichotomy, because as Gia Tolentino writes in Trick Mirror, with the internet, there's no backstage. You're always performing, you're always visible, everything you do can be tracked, discussed, analyzed, criticized, canceled. And so we're talking online right now, we're sort of like discussing our exhibition, but we're also performing kind of like a conversation in a sense. I mean, it has become difficult to distinguish between, your own self and your performed persona in the internet, right? And I think that video games kind of like brought that crisis into focus, before other media, perhaps with photography, because photography is not purely photography is purely representative in a sense, is a presentation, but video games are performative. So you're actually, they're aspirational, they're like, you're someone else. And so when you bring, the logic of photography with the practice of gaming together and, social media and internet, blah, 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 obviously you create all sorts of short circuits and friction.
That's interesting. I mean, when you talk about video games, you think in terms of, the relationship between the self and the avatars in the computer game, or you're thinking more in terms of like the practices of streamers of video games, which are performing online for several hours on Twitch, and like we are.
Both, because I tend to like distinguish between video games and game videos, And to me, it's impossible to talk about video games without talking about game videos. That is all that what we were just talking about, the performative, social, collective game playing activity that is shared online on Twitch. And you can have like millions of followers if you're like somebody like PewDiePie or Ninja or many more, or you can just be streaming by yourself. So in a sense, the layers of mediation are, extremely complicated because there's you performing on a screen, but also performing in front of an audience. And so it's like very schizophrenic and very, very kind of, I find it very, very interesting, but yes, to respond to your question, I think both the act of game playing, you and the avatar, but also you and the audience. And so you're performing gameplay in front of a live viewership, often.
Yeah, and so I think it's interesting maybe to see this kind of conversion, right? Or parallel lines of this relationship in games and this relationship in other social media, because maybe this gamification of Instagram phase of Gia Tolentino, or the TikTok phase of Captain.
Right.
So it kind of seems like an avatarization of the self. So I don't know, maybe there's a parallel there. But I thought maybe we could start by showing one of the work that actually in the end didn't make it into the show, but maybe was one of the starting points. I'm talking about Robbie Cooper's Alter Ego project.
Or seminal.
Which looked at very basically, right, like this diptych looked at the difference between the player and their avatars, so how they see themselves. I think there's a gallery down here. It's a bit small. So I think this project is so strong in its simplicity because somehow it shows many different, like you have the very first, the superhero idea, right? Like escape into a world of games and simulation in order to escape from, I don't know, the frustration of your life. And here it of course gets to a much more complicated level, more sentimental, emotional level, right? Like this idea of the robot as avatar for a person who has extreme disability. So, the avatar and this virtual world as something where you can actually have a different social life, a life also where you're not judged on your appearances, where like the construction of identity without all this other baggage that the body and all of its issues brings with it. Then of course, other examples also speak for themselves, like the certain projections of oneself. So the avatar is how you want to be, or, this also the categories of gender as well. This project is also quite early because it's getting out of. So this is from 2007. So, the graphic is already telling in a way. There was also, I remember seeing also another of this diptych by Cooper where the player and the avatar were actually almost the same, which I thought was
right.
Do you remember that? I think it was like
I do.
Right.
No, you're right. So you have all these different kind of like the idea of the avatar as, the video game also as aspirational. So you become in the game what you can be in real life. It's kind of like, living your world, playing ours, the famous PlayStation. So you can be fully yourself only within the video game space. But also the avatar is compensative, like, the kid unfortunately died after the project was done, and he's already kind of like a cyborg because he's a machine. Basically, the machines are what are keeping him alive, and he's a robot within the video game. And So the video game also is a form of empowerment, basically, because it can be in a space where there are no constraints, the same constraints that he faces in real life. But also, you're right. There's also this idea of the video game as a mirror, right? You sort of like duplicate yourself, your features within the game space.
Maybe also this image that I found now in Google Images, I didn't remember this one.
Right.
Military, for example, is very telling, right? Especially
Totally.
with
Totally.
the military legacy that games inherit, and kind of the simulation as training for the military. Somehow that relation in that field becomes very much more complex. And this one was the one that I remembered, I think.
Yeah, right. Kind of like the Matrix. Yeah, that's very Arun Faraki, right? Yeah. The video game is what prepares you for war, but is also what also try to soothe your pain after the war, right? It's used to treat PTSD, etc., etc. So in a sense, you're kind of like transitioning from real life to the video game, kind of like, you know, smoothly, like a frictionless, as, you know, Mark would say at this point. And also, of course, there's a lot of, you know, gender and identity play. You know, you can be someone else. You can bring your own like true nature through customization and a performative play within the video game. But you're right. This project was dates back to 2007, which is when Second Life, for example, was huge, when the idea of the metaverse and 3D spaces was dominant in society. And it's just before basically when Facebook took over, and the idea that this is your name, this is your identity. Also from 2007 is that famous project by the Mattis, right? Ava and Franco Mattis, the 13 Most Beautiful Avatars, right? When they sort of like recreated the famous Andy Warhol's project, within Second Life, once again, which was not a video game, but a virtual world, which is still active, by the way, and was funded by this guy, Philip Rosedale, very interesting guy. There's a religious theme, kind of like you know, the running through Second Life as the kind of like the not the afterlife, but almost. Yeah, this is the project that, you know, 2007. So it was exactly, it came out the same year as.
Right, and I think, you know, we were saying this is also something that unfortunately couldn't make it in the show because it was showing a photo museum in their solo show a few weeks before. But, you know, we were saying how in the late 90s and early 2000s, I think there was this strong divide between the idea of the self offline or out of the screen and the idea of the self online, right? So you had this very different personas alleged, or like sociologists were scrambling to find what happened to identity between on or outside of the screen or inside of the screen, which I think that has been completely shattered now with the
oh, right, I agree.
Yeah, so I think it's also an interesting moment in time, but then this avatarification, or like this avatar relationship, becomes much more complex, no, somehow.
Right. I think kind of like the landmark was also The Matrix, which came out in 1999, right? By two directors actually who transition, right? And, you know, I'm mentioning The Matrix because the new film has just been announced. The trailer was released today, but it was really about the idea of, you know, if you think about it, performative play, avatars, you know, the desert of the real versus the shiny, beautiful virtual world like The Matrix, right? And so that was, I think, The Matrix is so rich in video game metaphors and, you know, this dichotomy between the self and the avatar. Neo is so perfect, whereas in the real life he's kind of like a loser. He's just, you know, floating in a pod. In a sense, is a metaphor of, you know, like a lot of gamers that are kind of like otakus. They're just like kind of like reclusive, and but, you know, they might be edgelords and super powerful within, I don't know, World of Warcraft or Fortnite or, you know, whatever.
Yeah,
you know,
that's another one of those like
Stereotypes.
Valid stereotypes, but not the only one, right? I think that
Right.
also what was interesting about the project by Cooper, they showed many different trajectories of this, but that was one of the frustrated nerd in its
Right.
And in the meantime, I just brought up this hashtag on Facebook, SLVSRL, which is supposed to be Second Life versus real life. So you see this poster from 22nd of July, so quite recent.
Right.
So I actually, so it's, okay, so this is users, not artists, this is Facebook users who are bringing up pictures of themselves and then their avatars in Second Life. Or except for this one who looks like, I think he has a Second Life companion. Anyway, I just wonder if, we could take a look at this and see if something has changed, because it looks like from just this few selection, there's much more trying to create a similarity. I don't know in which direction, but rather than the escapist versions that we've seen before.
Right.
Maybe there's a Second Life phase.
Yeah, that's a very good point. But it's interesting, like, the vernacular, uses the same kind of like formal strategies, the diptych, absolutely.
The split screen.
And it's interesting that now Facebook, as I'm, is pushing for, the metaverse, and, they bought Oculus just a few years ago. So virtual reality. So in a sense, it's like we're going back to 2005, right? We have better technologies, but I mean, the narrative has not evolved considerably. And, the very company that kind of killed Second Life is now trying to bring it back through, they push it out of the window and either bringing it back, from the back door or the. So it's kind of fascinating. I'm not sure. I'm a little bit skeptical about virtual reality in this kind of, but because of the history of the medium and so many failures, so many Walter Grusing talk about virtual reality as the medium tries to erase itself and achieve maximum immediacy, but it's frustrated by its own very hardware. It's very cumbersomeness. So I don't know if this time around, the metaverse, virtual reality, it is, the avatars are gonna, become mainstream, because this is still kind of like niche. This is still kind of like.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, the question of the transparent interface, the immersive medium, I think it's still on, and especially, like if we think about photography as well, you have that panoramas early on, and then in cinema you have IMAX and curved screen and all of this idea of trying to really disappear into the medium. I don't know how that would play out tied to this idea of becoming someone else. I think that there is this more, again, playful, idea of suspending your disbelief, which has nothing to do with the technology. I mean, of course, it has to do with it, but it doesn't come from there.
Right.
I think it is much more inside the possibility of play itself, to suspend your disbelief and role play. And I mean this, of course, critically, right? Like play not another person, but a person that a role that is denied to you, and then you can perform. So I think in that sense, it's much more stronger than, like how immersive the last.
And I think this kind of, no, you're completely right. And this kind of project also kind of like highlighted also the limits of this sort of mirroring and the idea of customization, because I don't know if you've noticed, but I mean, 95% of these avatars are white. And so, for example, in a game like The Sims, right, there's always been a problem in, creating Sims that are reflective of non-white cultures, for example. And so you have artists like Ebonics, or a lot of modders, a lot of artists doing skins, and they specialize also in hair, in features that, that are more reflective of non-white normative like cultures, and they share their projects with the community. Sometimes they sell the skins. Also, because the interesting thing about The Sims is that this is one of the most popular video games ever, and it's got an incredible editor, super advanced. I find the editor much more compelling than the game itself, to be honest. But and yet, if you're trying to recreate non-white avatars and culture, it's not as proficient, it's not as advanced. And so, in a sense, the modders come in and fill up the gap and try to provide a service that the company itself is not providing the user. So I find this, and there's a really good article on Wire Magazine that kind of provides an overview of this phenomenon, and there's always much more, but I'm just going to share in the chat. I don't know if you have, what is it? Yeah, here we go. And do you want to say something about Ebonics, for example, in the show, or?
Sorry, I'm trying to figure out where the chat went. You can go.
Oh.
You can maybe present.
Here we go. This one. I'm just sharing with everybody. And this is just an overview. But for example, Ebonics, Danielle Udo is quoted, and they're all very young. They're from all over the world, and they create all sorts of Sims-related content. There's also like a lot of videos, tutorial on YouTube about how to create realistic African-American Sims. So this is a very interesting phenomenon. I would also quote Skywinati. I don't know if which is another artist from Canada, and she's also interested in this idea of representation and also what is lacking, what is missing from mainstream video games in representing alternative cultures. So she has all this project about, for example, natives within
first generation, right?
Yeah, first generation native within Second Life and other virtual worlds.
A few projects. I think there was was this one I remember, for example. This, dancers with custom avatars with the first generations dresses, Aboriginal storytelling to cyberspace.
Right.
And I think what was also interesting about her, she was talking about these images as machinima graph.
Right.
Which kind of, was I remember reading it and thinking that it was, it's very precise in the sense because she does machinimas, so machinima animations, videos, and then she takes stills from them. But I don't know, it just made me feel like, so this is her. Like there's so many kind of layers to this work.
Right. And on a similar note, there's also, for example, Lyndon Johnson. We're featuring his work, Away With You, from 2016. And it's really, once again, it's about the limits of simulation, right? There's always this rhetoric about photorealism and how powerful these video games are in representing reality. But once again, this project is really about how basketball games editors are so sort of flawed when it comes to representing, the African-American face. And so this project is really interesting because it mixes the idea of the editor, the tutorial, ASMR, and it's presented in the exhibition as an installation, right? Because there's also a video on Rhizome. There's a wonderful curated selection of videos by Sandra Perry and Lyndon Johnson and others. But I think the installation is very powerful because it uses this mesh, which is the same mesh used, for example, for the jersey used by athletes, etc. So there's a lot of there it is. There's a lot of layers and metaphors when it comes to a work like this, and this is straight out the video game editor, right?
So, and this whole project starts from this promise of this NBA game to capture
Right.
the face of the player, right?
Right.
Turn him into someone else because of the biases that are present in the photographic capture of these softwares, which is always based on widescreen.
I mean, if you think about it, that you know, the customization itself within games is a game. It's another sort of like meta layer. You know, in a game like Cyberpunk 2077, you know, customize your genitals.
Man, yeah.
It's like a big thing.
I remember, yeah, like I spent like half an hour trying to customize just because it was so fascinating, like how much the
right.
The details.
So what was it mirroring or was it aspirational? I guess that's the real question when it comes to, you know.
I think it was explorative, to be honest. Like I was a complete like gender bending asexual cyborg. Let's see if we can find like a.
We're gonna be banned from Twitch immediately if you look for the penis customizing tool.
All female character creator option, all male character creator options. That's one of the two. Oh, so this is going through every.
Yeah, I mean, some of these videos are insane.
I can just let it go at double speed while we talk, maybe. Yeah, because that's the thing, and I think Lyndon Johnson's work, and then the avatars of Ebonix, of Daniel Dugarania, are kind of representative of two different strategies, no? That artists and designers can have to deal with the same notions of identity, of marginalized group, of the difficulties also to be represented from a voice that is their own, because you know, like the custom scenes are very, again, as we said, like it's very empowering, right? Like the ability to create a custom avatar, while at the same time, like Lyndon Johnson is showing all of this, like the problems within the game industry that is trying to promise this flawless neutral technology, no?
Right.
These are kind of the two poles and the friction within it. And again, you know, if we look back also at the history of representation in general, you have again these two poles of the representation of the self as creating a norm, normalizing, but also giving the tools for people to break the rules of how the female or the male can and should be represented, how gender should be represented, and how class and how different backgrounds and different ethnic groups can be represented. So it's a very interesting, like, double-edged sword. I think that it's always there, and this friction is present even within this idea of play and games.
Right. I was wondering do you think that if you take another piece that we have in the exhibition, right? You know, Cindy Sherman's famous, you know, photos of herself performing pretty much as a movie character, right? And so once again, you have the media providing models, templates, paradigms, and right. And I was wondering, like, do you think that video games sort of like provide a similar set of references for younger generations, much like cinema did in the 70s for an artist like Cindy Sherman? Like, what's your take?
Yeah, I think that I mean, given that we're talking about the AAA games, the game industry, or the indie games, right? There is also that
right.
To clarify, because I think that there is definitely an obsession with photorealism, with lifelike simulation, which carries with it a lot of biases. You know, when the game industry, when the guy from the CEO from the Unreal Game Engine says that in 10 years we will have games which are indistinguishable from real life,
Right.
talking about photorealism, and you already have the doubt that he's talking about not realism towards photography, but this kind of transparency toward real life, right? Like simulating real life. So I think that what they're doing indirectly sometimes or often is really remediating cinema, but with the idea that cinema is real life, you know?
Right.
So I see a lot of, kind of reinforcing the same sort of semiotics, you know, all the work that you've also done in Forza Horizon, and the screenshot that I see from in-game photography from Forza Horizon is just like car brand selfies, you know, it's this kind of like cinematic and advertisement symbols.
I have to confess that, I mean, of course, like Cindy Sherman's project is seminal, it's a landmark and everything, but I don't know if you're familiar with Miranda July's photographic shoot about her performing as an extra. Oh, here we go. This one. She did it in 2009, which is, you know, pretty much around the same time that, you know, we're talking about the other kind of avatars, right? Here's the link. And I mean, it's kind of like a joke. It's a one-liner, but it's also really funny because she's performing like the extras in iconic movie scenes. So it's just like the kid who nobody sees, nobody cares for, or there's like, I don't know, Vertigo, and there she's the woman passing by. I find it's kind of funny. I mean, it's hysterical. It's like the entire Cindy Sherman, you know, like the emphasis is not of the hero, but all the
right. And maybe this brings us to NPCs, no? Because this
Yeah.
sounds like this is exactly like those non-playable characters in games that wait. So, for example, what do we have? Yeah, okay. Let's look at this. Am I sharing the sound of my computer or through my speaker? Let me just re-share the screen real quick to be sure. Share sound.
Hello, and welcome back to another video. So recently, with the growing popularity of GTA 5 roleplay, I have had a lot of questions about it, as well as I know a lot of people have just been kind of interested in it, not knowing too much and kind of wanting to know kind of what it is, honestly. Also, I know a lot of people try to explain it to either their friends or family, and just because, you know, they say the word roleplay, they think it's some weird thing. First of all, it's not some weird thing. I mean, sometimes for some people it is, but in general, it's pretty much a normal game, just with some different rules and some stuff that makes it a little.
Okay, let's skip ahead.
I'm gonna kind of go over it as fast as I can with not, you know, skipping too many of the main parts. I don't want this video to be super long, and I want it to be pretty concise and able to digest pretty easily. So starting off, again, GTA 5 roleplay is typically played on a modded GTA 5 client. Now there's a bunch of different clients that have their advantages and disadvantages, but the main three are Alt-V, which is most rarely used, and then FiveM and Rage MP. And this client allows for people hosting the server to control the server to make it feel a bit more lifelike and a lot more balanced, with typically a lot more restrictions on what players can
Getting
do.
a bit
To make it so
technical.
it's
Let
not
me
just
skip ahead if
out there. But most servers try and avoid it and try and keep it a little bit more realistic than how it would be on GTA Online or other kind of online games. The main goal for the majority of these RP servers is to allow players of it to create their own characters and kind of step out of their normal life or their normal games where they just go and they do a task or whatever, and kind of give them the freedom to go do as what they want with the server or what they want on the server or for their character. Players are allowed to kind of step out of their normal life and quote-unquote role play, as you know, obviously it's implied, a character or a role different from themselves in real life, or just, you know, playing the game as normal. Commonly, players will take on the roles that NPCs would normally take in GTA, such as the police force, EMS, criminals, store owners, car dealers. There's honestly a ton, again, depending on the servers. Some servers have more jobs, some servers have less, but in general, there's a ton more stuff for different players to do, and they can be anything, again, from just like a hobo to a high-ranking police officer. You can kind of decide what your story is and kind of build it from there, and, you know, obviously go through the different avenues on different servers to try and get.
Okay, so basically, the idea of GTA 5 roleplay is to roleplay as an NPC. So it's this community of people. I forgot that this video is not actually showing me much footage of it. It's just him driving while he speaks. So, but as this guy mentioned, is people trying to step out of the game, the main character, right? Like the game is always about like you being the hero in all of these games. And now you step out and pretend to be one of the side characters. So almost like the extras that you mentioned in July's project. But so let's see if we find some footage. I remember seeing one where they were like, you know, so respect, like you going with the car very slow, stopping at the traffic lights, doing exactly.
Yeah, there's also a Market Kornblad project back in the day when it basically was saying that the most like the wildest thing, the most like controversial thing you can do in a game like GTA is basically, you know, performing as a law-abiding citizen and be respectful of the norm. So that's really subversive. That's really transgressive.
What's Pokelols?
Don't know.
The short story is porn, but it didn't really turn out the way I planned.
If you're looking for the hotels, it's over there.
I'm not looking, I just got them there, I live there. Dude.
Welcome to town. The hospital is
Oh, thank
located
you.
that way, southwest, east.
Okay, so I'm not a doctor. What do you think? Do I look like a
Welcome.
doctor to you?
Got any wares to sell? What a nice day it is.
Are you?
So just to maybe clarify, the voice is the voice of the players, while the avatars, of course, belong to the team characters. And I don't know exactly what this was, but it was a beautiful, surreal conversation. You know, like I can see entire like theater.
This is like the theater of the absurd. This is like Ionesco.
Ionesco plays, right?
Freaking phenomenal. I love it.
So that's definitely something that I want to look into when it comes to, you know, not only performing yourself as an like with the choice of an avatar, but then also kind of staying in character for
Right.
extended periods of time, interacting with other people in that character in this like server on this virtual world, and getting actually out of the game missions of whatever people decide to do on GTA 5 Online, which is basically robbing banks and doing heists.
Which brings us back to the idea of gameplay that we were discussing last week. Because if you think about it, this is a form of emerging gameplay, kind of like you do things with the game that were not intended or designed.
Yeah, transformative play, right?
Right, but it's much more engaging than, you know, following the rules, right? If you think about it. Here's another example, which is, I think I mentioned to you, this is a basically using The Sims to perform a Chekhov play by this theater performer. You know, during COVID, all the lockdown, all the theaters were closed, you know, social distancing. And so people use games like GTA, The Sims, World of Warcraft to do things that are not kind of like part of the game itself, the rules, the goals. And in this case, this performer, he basically, you know, reenacted. Some did Shakespeare, some did Chekhov within The Sims live on Twitch, and that was, I thought, extremely fascinating. Doing the seagull on The Sims 4, yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. But then, you know, just this idea of playing as an NPC was interesting. Also connected outside of games with all these groups which existed before on Facebook, which are like, let's pretend to be boomers, let's pretend to be fish, and so on. But during the pandemic, this also had another like kind of surge in popularity.
Why is that? What do you think?
I think because of like the social interactions that, well, I don't know. I mean, this is just my personal opinion, but I can imagine just not having social interactions and then replacing them in a way that, you know, it gives you comfort. I think that there was this episode of Reply All where they talked about this creator of the Facebook group of
you're right. It was a great episode.
Do you remember a group where members pretend to be corporate drones in a non-existent
Totally.
office, which eventually was taken over by these like actual office workers. So it was this very like young guy who was making fun of this office life, and then the office worker loved it so much and took over the group. But so yeah, I think that there was this need for social interactions, and then role play. What we were saying, this suspension of disbelief, this magic circle, it makes things a bit easier. Like, you know, it's not real, so maybe it's also easier to do it, right? Like to be a character, because you don't have the consequences in real life. You know what we were saying last time also about this romantic theory of play. If I play social interaction in an office, in a Facebook group, I can be more carefree because I know that it will not have consequences on my actual job and stuff like that. And sorry, you want to say something?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is fascinating because it seems to me like the anti-millennial kind of dream, right? The millennial wants to be an influencer, super popular, super famous, but here you want to be kind of like the everyday man, the white fly on the wall. You want to be kind of like nondescript, generic, really an NPC in the sort of like. So it's also kind of like aspirational in that sense.
Yeah, totally. I think you're absolutely right that there is like this millennial dream of becoming an influencer, as much as there is a millennial dream of becoming an NPC or an ant in an ant colony. Or yeah, this is a list of let's pretend groups on Facebook. The ant in an ant colony was actually something that a friend and also an ex-intern of the museum, Laura Paloma, sent to me, and thanks to her I discovered this, because it has 1.8 million members, and they all basically just write lift, this crumble to the queen, and everybody's typing lift.
They're playing cement, right? Cement. It's phenomenal. I love it. So meta.
So I think that's also this other thing, right? Like of people burning out, or like a millennial generation, but also other generations, more in terms of like the contemporary culture of work in capitalist systems, and then retreating to an ant colony, a virtual ant colony on Facebook where they can role play an ant.
Hey, have you ever read, I mean, this is not visual, obviously, this is not a video game, but have you ever read a novel titled Me, a novel by Tomoyuki Hoshino? Came out in 2017, I think. This is really interesting. It's a story of a guy who, it works for, it's kind of like, not a burnout, but a guy who wanted to be a photographer, okay? He had a lot of aspirations.
Sorry. Yeah.
But he didn't make it. So he ended up working for like the equivalent of Media World or Best Buy, and he sells cameras, right? Nikon and Sony cameras, etc., etc. So one day and he has the kind of like a dead end job. You know, he's basically just like, you know, a salesman, right? Yeah, exactly. I thought it was really interesting. Forget about the ratings on Amazon. They don't know what I'm talking about. But actually, the lower the ratings, usually the better the novel. But so he finds a phone. No, wait. He's at McDonald's during a break, and he's eating. And there's another guy, and there's the guy leaves the phone next to him. So he picks it up, right? And then at one point, he gets a phone call, and he kind of steals the phone. And it's actually the guy's mother, and he pretends to be the son, which is another guy more successful, etc. And the mother doesn't realize that she's talking to someone else, to an NPC, to a clone, to an avatar. And so I don't want to spoil it too much, but basically he ends up performing as the son, the real son, and the mother doesn't recognize it. Or maybe she recognizes him, but she doesn't care. And so the novel gets more and more complicated, and then you realize there are a bunch of people that are all me, like these kind of otakus, generic guys nondescript, and they all want to live a life of mediocrity. They embrace the nondescript generic. It's very Kafkaesque, but also like kind of embracing, you know, the dead end life of, you know, free of pressure, free of like performing, free of likes and all that bullshit. So if you have the chance, check it out, because also it's really about photography. It's really about performance. It's really about images, but also like renouncing and refusing the image culture that comes with it.
That's super interesting. Thanks for the tip. And also like this thing of the mediocrity and the NPC and somehow outsourcing, right, all of these things to the computational agents, let's say, is a good connection to these AI bot influencers who showed up on Instagram a few years back, no? Maybe we can talk about that, because let me see if I can find the link. So Lil Michela,
Right.
You know, there was this moment, when is this article from? 2019, yeah. So a couple of years back, with the rise of these virtual influencers.
Right.
But funnily enough, like they had the same drama that teenagers in the flash had. But it I think it's probably still a thing, and probably I don't know enough about the evolution of it. There's probably many more.
She has an agent. She has an IRL flesh and bone agent that.
Yeah. So basically, they also have different backstories, and some are more different than other. So Lil Michela turned out to be completely the product of a designer, photographer, creator, basically. And it's a very commercial product in the sense that it's doing works with big fashion brands and so on. So this is completely also as much as role play, as much as it is gameplay, if we want to talk of our chapters, of our exhibitions. Shudu, the first digital supermodel, I think it came out slightly after. So she's also created by a fashion photographer. So it's also quite interesting, you know, this connection between CGI, photography, and Instagram.
Right. Well, the fashion industry has been trying to co-opt the game world for like decades now. There's a lot of collaboration, Gucci, Prada, and all this stuff. Skins, Fortnite, you know. I don't think they nailed it yet.
This one is interesting because Lightning is supposed to be a character from a game, and was used in a Louis Vuitton campaign. So it's, again, I think this idea of like the brand, as you were saying, kind of co-opting game culture, fandom, using them inside the fashion industry and so on. I think the last thing that was interesting that I sent you some time ago was this project by this person called CodeMiko,
Hmm.
which is kind of the latest in the evolution of all of these influencers. But first of all, like technically it's insane, because all of these things seems to be done live and mapped, or like with an
Proxemics and body gestures, and yeah, totally.
Oh, soon they will start a live stream apparently. So, but so CodeMiko is so the backstory of CodeMiko is that she's supposed to be an NPC, a non-playable character from a game who was glitched and then ended up in all sorts of different games that she couldn't live in. But then this her creator, who calls herself the Technicians, also came out to reveal herself and how this thing is done. So you see her with this rig and with this like phone, all of this stuff that is being done on the fly in real time, and you have this like 3D CGIs influencer, Twitch streamer, not really sure at this point what we're looking at, what we're talking about. You know?
Stop mocking me!
Creepy.
Jesus Christ! You know that laying egg is
And it's also like really peak internet culture, right? Like you have
Oh.
simulated People the Frogs going around. You have all sorts of like keywords here on the clothing appearing. The chat on a screen, on top of the screen, or a simulated screen. So anyway, yeah, I don't know yet what to make of it, but also in terms of like role playing and the idea of like the representation of the self through, like, it's interesting to see what that could do to all of these ideas, you know, like if this technologies could be in which ways they could be used.
Perhaps a counterbalance to this would be another project that we have in the show, which is Petra Simmons, the Monomyth guiding project, which is kind of interesting because it's also about the idea of building yourself through media and through narrative and through storytelling. And she's an Hungarian artist who lives in Japan. And she's been creating this fascinating sort of like narrative about herself within, you know, the spaces of Japan. But she tells the story of herself through media, through photography, through anime, through video game Skyrim, and she makes these fascinating videos. She has an entire series called Monomyth, which is also, as you can see, very hyper-mediated, right? As to use a expression from Walter and Grusin once again. And in all these episodes, she's trying to, you know, figure out who she is and what she's doing. But all she uses to build her own persona are, you know, pieces of media. In a sense, right? There's no Petra aside of media. Petra is the, you know, combination of a video game kind of like interface, dialogue from anime and films and novels, and there's no a true self. You know, this idea again, once again, there's a true self and there's a representation. It's kind of like completely passé in an age where everything is mediated, everything is hyper-mediated, actually.
And also, I think it's very interesting. I mean, I love this work. It's also like how people who grew up with video games also think about life through, and themselves through game, through game aesthetics, through game psychology, you know, through game narratives. So also this idea of personas, right? Like you can choose your avatar somehow. And also that connects a little bit with selfie culture as well, maybe. It's not too much of a stretch, but this idea that selfies, unlike, you know, portrait in traditional photography, have an expiration date. You know, they always need to be refreshed. They always need to create a version of you.
Right. Totally.
which
Totally.
allows much more fluidity in the identity too.
If you were to think,
media technique, no? In terms
yeah,
of
no, totally.
beautiful.
Yeah, I love the style. I love this collage idea, the assemblage, the mixture of photorealism and fiction and cartoon and video games and anime. It's really, really interesting. You really need to see the entire series to sort of like realize how profound and deep the entire series is. I really love it.
I think it's all online, so
Yeah, it's a complete. It's all available, and it's also like constructed like main quests, side quests. It's very like game-like and without being interactive, right? But she uses the language of video games also to articulate this notion of the avatar, your performing persona. Fascinating glitches, and it's really cool.
Did you wanna add? Oh, maybe we could talk about Natalie PNG, just as a reference of maybe someone who did not make it in the show, but.
Yeah, this is another interesting project, and also the idea. She's also she's an artist from South Africa, and the idea is really trying to, in the 70s, there was all this conversation about the male gaze, the cinematic gaze, and now the question is like, what is the technological gaze? What is to be seen constantly? What is to be viewed? What is to be but also not just by humans, also by algorithms, by machines, because most of the viewing and most of the image making today is made by machines. And she tries to like think and reflect on these ideas of the self, the persona, seen online, being constantly online, being constantly visible. We go back to the idea of Tolentino's reinterpretation of Erving Goffman and the collapse between the implosion of the backstage in an age where there's no backstage and everything is like, always visible, always on the screen, right, like right now.
And speaking of, there's no backstage. Everything is on screen. Everyone's on stage. I think that maybe we could also add. Oh no, it's.
Oh right. I love that.
I mistyped the link. You want the? Oh yeah, let's just show the Twitch video. So do you want to explain a little bit this project, Matteo? Because I have questions. Yeah,
so totally. I don't know. This is interesting because it's also kind of like at the crossroads of many different things, right? The idea that the influencer is the ultimate neoliberal subject and everything that it does is transactional. And it sort of like empowers, quote unquote, the viewers to the point that it basically obeys to their demands, requests for money, right? Everything is, which is an extreme form of camming. So the idea is really...
Yeah, so what's the idea first?
Yeah, the idea is that the viewers are in control and the viewers decide what these guys is supposed to do during the day, what he's supposed to say, what he's supposed to eat, how he's supposed to dress, what car he's supposed to, if he's supposed to play video games. So basically, you are remote control by your own viewers, right? And obviously, in order to achieve some kind of power within this game, you have to pay him, right? And so this idea is that you become the avatar of the viewers, of the spectators, which is kind of like if you think about performance art. I mean, this reminds me of, I don't know, like Santiago Serra or something, like kind of like a stream. As a gesture itself, if you think about it. I mean, this could turn very dark very quickly, which is probably why I find it so interesting. What you said you were confused, or kind of not confused, but like you had questions. Like, what's your take on this? Is this a parody of caricature of life in the influencer, age, or what do you think?
Right, because so this is looking like the game The Sims,
Right.
but it's not an artistic performance or parody. It's somebody who, I guess, well, if he wasn't, he's now an influencer with a lot of course, viewers and followers.
Right.
Who's just submitting himself to what you just said, like the control of these viewers. And it's also presented.
You're a puppet. You're a puppet. Right. Exactly.
And it's presented by Coinbase, which is the cryptocurrency wallet. So it kind of becomes this small thing that eats itself.
Pure dystopia. Totally.
And this is just the character creation. But one question also is like, how did they? So also, I'm not really sure how they did it because it seems quite complex. Because this is the whole house.
Right.
It's like a whole set.
All right, I'm going back in.
Yeah, the production values are pretty fascinating if you think about it.
Right?
It's genius.
Also, I don't see now in the replay that maybe
Anybody in here? Hold on.
like
This is something that Mike Kelly or Chris Burden could have done. If they were a little younger or still around.
I'm gonna get an electrician to look at that.
So this is what's going on in the chat at that
I
time.
feel awful too.
And how can they vote? I guess you have to pay to vote, right? And somebody, I don't
Let me
know.
wash my hands. That was a fucking big run.
But also reminded me this thing. Have you seen this? This came out, I don't know if it's still alive. This app. It was called the New App.
Which one?
I have an article that I find out.
Oh yeah. I read about it, but I never.
I mean,
Yeah,
of course,
yeah.
the media was a bit extreme. Let's pay to control. It was more like, should I
Yeah.
fill Vinny's room with packing peanuts? It's kind of
I
like.
think Taylor Lawrence wrote an article for the New York Times about this.
But this was.
This is like
Basically,
monetizing
yeah.
every single aspect of your existence, like to a level that is kind of like unprecedented, right?
Right, not only monetizing, but really the control that comes with it, right? Like that
Right.
you have these choices that you give these viewers, and then in exchange for money, it's like how much are you going to give away, basically?
I think this is the future, man. I think this is like a preview of things to come. I think that for the future of education is going to be OnlyFans. So, but without the porn, like where there's this website called OutSchool also where teachers are making like 100. I mean, some teachers obviously is always like, winner take all mentality, but it's also kind of like a cross between a tutorship, OnlyFans again, customize homeschooling on the screen. I think, that's the future of academia. I'm speaking for myself, working in academia, where in an age where teachers have become performers, basically online performers, and because you Twitch streamers, because you're doing this online thing and nobody's watching you, that, and nobody gives a shit about what you're saying, and so you have to come out with like special effects and stuff like that to engage the students. And so in a sense, this is just like, we're the canary in a coal mine, man, and this is just this is the future.
I love how, like we're always trying to, also in the discussions for the show, like we want to balance, we want to have some optimist position. We want to show this empowerment that we talk about. But in the end, it's always like, there's no hope.
No, we know that the empowerment argument is just so like, nobody believes in it for a second. It's what corporations say, to sell you some crap, but nobody really like.
Yeah, it's true. But at the same time, like if you see only through the lens of, capital and control, then it's really like, such a great
capital realism, man. It's easy to imagine the end of education than to imagine the end of capitalism.
disaster. I mean, and on this note,
the darkness surrounds us.
no, I think I want to end at least on one of the Facebook group where we pretend. Let's see, like where we pretend to be boomers and Oh, it's also a meme, of course. Let's end with a meme on a group where we all pretend to be.
Phenomenal. I love it. I love it. It's so good.
So yeah, this was kind of what we were looking for, no? The thing
Yeah.
that, the pandemic kind of created this surge in the ant colony.
So if you were to pick like a project that you find extremely, like perhaps the most fascinating in this like performative role playing, it would be this one. It would be like to be ants in an ant colony.
No, I think that the one of GTA 5 role play, maybe because
Right.
I want to learn more, but I remember seeing it a couple of years ago, and it was, first of all, there was a community of a lot of people, and there were also like dedicated servers, like it
Oh,
could be
yeah.
something where, experimental theater,
Totally.
stuff like, interesting stuff could be done. So I really, and I think, I don't know, there's just something beautiful about, I remember seeing one where one guy was pretending to be role-playing an old man NPC. And I watched maybe like 2 hours, nothing happened. It was just like going really slow. I mean, the commitment, it was insane, like, I think,
Wow. It's like performing the graveyards by Tale of Tales, like the famous video game, but like
yeah.
for hours and hours. That's
For
again,
hours and hours, yeah.
performance art. Genius.
Yeah, absolutely. So what about you? What is
If I have to pick like my favorite, so I think that there's nothing more radical than performing yourself, because everybody's performing something else and someone else. So there's this guy. I don't know if you know. It's not a photographer, it's not a traditional artist. It's called Kaveh Zahedi, and he teaches at New School, and he made a few films, including The Sheikh and I. Here we go, and yeah, that's him. And he made this show about the show, where he basically performs his own life, his own marriage, his own teaching through, and everything is kind of also it kind of like, it's like a segue into the next week, a couple of weeks project, which is replay, which is reenactment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really about performing yourself, but also reenacting in a kind of like Charlie Kaufman-esque sort of way. Your daily action, your daily conversation. It is as if like we would reenact our conversation that we just had for an hour for later consumption. And I'm performing the conversation. It's all kind of like a mirror game. And it started this show in 2015, right? About him getting separated from his wife Mandy, and teaching, and it's very dark also, because it's also part of like oversharing, which became very, and also like about radical honesty. It's very cringy, and it's weird because it's between the vernacular, but it's also extremely avant-garde. I highly recommend it. This guy also makes a podcast called 365 Stories That I Have to Tell You Before We Both Die. And it's a daily clip of like 2 minutes, when he tells the story. So he studied philosophy at Yale and studied film at UCLA, and lived in Switzerland for a few years, traveled around the world. And the stories are phenomenal. Like because it doesn't try to be liked, it tries to be himself, and he's very selfish, egocentric, but very focused, incredibly smart. And I don't know, it's one of my best parasocial relationships. They're all like, all my best friends are all virtual. I never met him in real life, and they never know that I exist. But this guy, to me, like performing Kaveh for the world, is just an incredible project. Really
wow, thanks a lot. Definitely check it out. All right, and I think on this note, we can close the stream and the conversation. And we'll meet next week to talk about replay.